Hey there guys, and welcome back. On this week's show, a simple table saw sled. Now, this table saw sled is not like your normal table saw sleds. For starters, it's a lot smaller because it has a purpose for me, and that purpose would be to make small boxes with. Now, what makes this sled a little different is the fact that it's used for both cutting the miters of the little boxes that you'll be making, as well as your 90-degree cuts. And it all starts off with some 1/2-inch thick plywood. Well, the first thing that we're going to need is the base for our sled. And for that, we need to cut a piece of 1/2-inch plywood that's 15 inches wide and 23 inches long. So the next thing that I want to do is I want to prepare the stock for my fences, both the front one or the near one and the far one. And a lot of other sleds use solid stock. I really don't want to do that. So in this case, I'm going to use some scrap offcuts of plywood. So I have double thicknesses here. The first thing that I'm going to do, because I want my fences eventually to be 2 inches wide and 1.5 inches thick. So 2 3/4-inch pieces, we're going to glue them together and let them dry overnight. While we're waiting for our fences to dry up, we can prepare the stock for our runner. And what I have here is a piece of maple. It's 3/8 of an inch thick and 3/4 of an inch wide, and it is cut that dimension so that it will fit and slide inside our miter slot here with very little play in it whatsoever. The ends here are a little smaller because, well, that was the board I had, but I'd say a good 95% of it is true along in here and fits nicely. But now we need to decide exactly where it's going to be positioned on our base. So what you want to do is you want to take your base and sit it on your table saw in such a way where when this blade is tilted at 45 degrees, mine tilts to the left. So when it tilts to the left at 45 degrees, it's going to cut a nice perfect miter along this edge. Keeping the rail in the same place roughly, switch it over to the other fence and see that you are roughly cutting a 90-degree cut now, roughly in the middle of the board. Once you get that position and you know where you want that to be, you can mark that position on your baseboard, give it a sanding, and then we will mark and drill and screw and glue this runner into place. Don't worry about the overhang that goes into the miter slots. We're going to leave that because it provides stability for the sled. So an easy way to do this now is once you have it in position, set your rip fence up against the edge of your plywood, lower your blade, and now you have a guide as to where to sit it so that you know that your runner is going to be square to your blade. Because of course, if your rip fence is square to your blade, this has to be square to your blade. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to place the marks and we're going to screw this in place. So I've drilled and countersunk some holes here in our base where I want it, and I have centered our rail on our board with the same amount of overhang at the front and the back. So now it's time to screw and glue this in place. So what I'm going to do with the board held firmly against the fence, I'm just going to mark the front and back edge on our maple strip. The reason for that, and this is a really unorthodox way to do this here, but you know what? It works. We're now going to put a thin strip of glue along here. You don't want to go crazy because you want to try and avoid squeeze out if you can. But if you do get any squeeze out, be sure to clean it up off your table saw right away to avoid rusting. So now with that in place, we're going to drill a pilot hole and put our first screw in. There we go. And we will continue this, making sure that it's flush against the fence all the way along for all of the holes that we drilled. Well, at this point, with the glue all dried up on our fence blanks, we will now run it through, trim off our rough edge here to get a nice straight edge, and then cut them down to their final width of 2 inches wide. So with the width cut of both our fence pieces, we now want to cut them to length. And one of them will be the same length as what our bed is long, and the other one will be 2 inches longer than that. So in my case, one will be 23 inches, the other one will be 25 inches long. It's now time to put our fences in place, and your longer one will go at the back of your bed for your sled, with the overhang being on the left-hand side if you're facing the table saw. In other words, when the blade is tilted and it's out to 45 degrees, we want it to cut into this extension here. As for our one that's the same length as our bed, that one will get glued on the front. Now, you want to make sure that they are 100% perfectly square to the bed of your sled and to your blade. For me, all I'm going to do is I know, and I've double checked and triple checked, that my edges are 100% square to the blade and to the bed, etc., etc. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use a straight edge along here. I'm going to clamp it in place so that I can't go beyond that, and I will seat this up against my straight edge and glue it and clamp it into place. Now, I don't want to put any screws in it, not just yet anyway. So for now, let's get it glued and clamped into place. So now I'm going to clean up all the squeeze out and let this set up for about a half an hour. Just give it enough time to get the glue to pretty much set. Once that's done, I'm going to do the exact same process with our longer fence, making sure that my overhang is on the left-hand side. So either way, I don't think we need another video of that. I'm going to get that fence glued up, and then I'll see you when I get that done. All right, and with things dried up, we can now unclamp it and we'll take it over to the table saw. Well, the purpose of bringing your sled over here to the table saw is not to make a cut just yet, but we want to mark where our blade is going to make contact. The reason for that is I want to reinforce these fences with screws, and I don't want to put a screw where the blade is going to come through. So we're going to mark the front end here, slide it forward. This will be for our 45-degree cut. We're just going to mark in the center of the miter of the kerf here, of the zero clearance. And then we'll take our jig, slide it over to the other miter slot. This is going to be for our through cuts, our straight cuts. And again, we'll mark the front and the back, marking in the center of the zero clearance insert. And we'll just flip this over now. And on the back, I'm going to draw a straight line between those two marks, and that will show us where not to put screws. From there, I'm going to go around, I'm going to put a couple here, and then in several places along here, probably 4 on each side, I think I'm going to put a number 8 by 2 inch screw countersunk all the way along the bottom here just to give the extra support to that fence. And now we'll give the back of the piece here a good sanding. Okay, so I've sanded the whole jig or the whole crosscut sled all the way through, and I've installed in the table saw a fine-tooth crosscut blade. The first thing you want to do is check the blade for square, and the way that I like to do it is I like to place well, in this case I use a Beal tilt box. I like to place it on one side of the blade and then check the blade for square, and there it is square. But I also like to, and I don't know why I do this, but I always do, I put it on this side and I check it on this side. I have no idea why I do that. Maybe it's just to make sure, I don't know, maybe it's just my way of double checking, but that's what I do. So now that we have that set, it is perfectly square. We now need to set the height. Now our fence here is 2 inches. So I want to cut 1 inch up into this fence, leaving 1 inch of support. That will give us a maximum thickness that we can cut inside our sled of 1 inch. So I'm going to raise this blade here to a height of 1.5 inches, and that will also incorporate our 1/2 inch base plate. And there we go, there's 1.5 inches. So the next thing I want to do now is with the runner in the left-hand miter slot and the extension of this fence on the left-hand side, we want to run this all the way through for a complete pass. So we will cut through the front fence, we will cut through the bed of our sled, and as well the back fence until we are completely clear of the blade. And now with our tilt box here, we'll just reset it to 0, make sure it's good. We will now set our blade at a 45-degree angle. We will double check it, we will triple check it. We will make sure that that is 100% at 45 degrees and not a bit below or a bit above. 44.95. And 45. Okay, so at this point now, with that set at 45, double and triple check it. Don't just say, okay, I'm at 45. Make sure that you've got this perfectly right, and once you're happy with it, I'll show you what to do. So at this point, we want to set our blade to 1.5 inches high again. Remember though, that it's a little different being on the 45 here. So we'll lower it until we get to our 1.5 inches height. Just check our gauge here. There we go, 1.5 inches. And right there is 1.5 inches. So we will lock that in place. And now what we're going to do is place our rail in the right-hand miter slot. And just like we did before, we are going to run this through a full pass all the way through and out through the back of the fence until we clear the blade, and then we can stop it at that point. Now at this point we have this kind of a floppy piece here. I don't like it. It's got to go. So I'm just going to line up a 1-inch chisel here on the flat of our extension and just gently tap it. We should be able to pop this piece right out. There we go. And then using that same chisel, I'm just going to go along here and tidy up that glue joint. There's a little bit of glue residue on there. Just like that. All right. Now the last thing to do here is those cuts that we just made. There's a little bit of tear out here, a little bit of fuzziness on the back end. We're going to give those kerfs a sanding, basically sand the fences on the top corners to take away the sharp edges, and that's pretty much about it. So this sled functions much like any other sled. If you're going to do the 90-degree cuts on your pieces, you have your slot or your miter bar in the left-hand miter slot and your blade at 90 degrees. If you're going to do the miters of, say, a box, which is the main purpose of this jig, it's kind of a box-making table saw sled, what you want to do is take your piece, which is cut at 90 degrees, and you want to line the top corner up with the kerf that you made in the back sled. Just like that. And as long as you have that lined up there, I have a scrap of wood behind, it's not sitting flush. There we go. So as long as you have that lined up, you should be able to make a perfect 90-degree cut. And let me just do a pass here and show you how that works. And just like that, you've cut your 45 for your box. And there you have it. A light-duty table saw sled. Guys, this sled is not meant for your heavy-duty kind of applications. This is basically a sled that will be, in my shop, designated for making small boxes. It is perfect for that application. There is plenty of room on the bed, being almost 2 feet wide. There gives you plenty of room to work on your pieces. And with that one rail instead of two, normally with the miter slot bars on a sled, normally there's 2 bars. One in each slot to stabilize it. With this one, there's only one, and that way you can utilize this for both your 45s of your boxes and your straight cuts. Kind of an all-purpose thing. It works perfectly. So, although it may seem kind of weird the way that it was put together and the way that it's made from what you're used to seeing on table saw sleds, let me just tell you that this one here, although a little different, it is just as functional and just as useful in the shop. Now, you're going to see this jig here on the show coming up soon, because what I'd like to do is over the next while, every once in a while, I'm going to scatter in a box build of a different type. And that box build will be from, or actually, that box build will be inspired by this book right here, which is 52 boxes in 52 weeks. Now, let me just say about this book. This is not an instructional book, not at all. What this is one man's journey where he decided he was going to make 52 boxes in 52 weeks, designing each one, and it goes through some of his thoughts and processes that he went through to design each box, and it gives you rough dimensions, and that's it. It gives you absolutely no instructions, no thickness of stock that he used for each individual box or that sort of thing. Just an overall dimension and then a story behind it. But there are some really great designs in there, and I would like to take some of those designs and make my own box inspired by those. So look forward to those on the show utilizing this sled, which of course, again, was also inspired from this book. Either way, guys, I think this is going to be a very useful jig in my shop. I think it is going to come in handy when it comes to making small utility boxes. Guys, I want to thank you so much for tuning in today. One thing you want to keep in mind when making any jig is that any jig is only as good as the preparation you take to make it. And if you make this jig out of square or out of whack, or it's not quite lining up right, it is not going to work. No matter how much you run it through the saw, no matter how much you do this or do that or tweak or twist, it is not going to work. So take your time and get things squared up and get things done properly. And at the end of it all, you'll have a great jig. Guys, if you haven't already, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Click the bell and then you won't miss the notifications of future episodes of the program. This one's been a good time today. I do like doing these little jigs. They are fun, and I like the fact that I get to use them later on in the show. I hope that you've enjoyed it as well. Guys, I also hope that you're going to try this one for yourself, and more importantly, I hope you're going to join me again next week when I bring you yet another woodworking video.